Have you ever felt slightly embarrassed when someone asks you, "So, what do you actually do?" and your brain just freezes? Because the honest answer is, a lot of things. You read about psychology for fun. You're learning video editing on the side. You have 3 half-finished business ideas. You're into fitness, philosophy, maybe coding, maybe art. You can't pick one lane. You never could. And somewhere along the way, you started wondering if that means something is wrong with you. We grow up in a world that worships the straight line. Pick a subject. Pick a career. Pick a niche. Specialize. Go deep. Become the expert. The message is clear: success belongs to the focused. The ones who choose early and never look sideways. But what if your brain simply isn't wired for a straight line? What if having too many interests isn't a weakness, but preparation? There's a quiet shift happening in the way the world works. For decades, the ideal professional was what people call T-shaped. Broad understanding across many areas, but deep expertise in one. One strong vertical line. One specialty. But the future isn't just asking for one vertical line anymore. It's asking for multiple. This is what some people now call the M-shaped future. Instead of one deep specialization, you develop depth in multiple areas, connected by a broad foundation. Imagine 2 or 3 vertical pillars instead of one. Not scattered curiosity. Not random dabbling. But real depth in more than one domain. And if you've always felt pulled in many directions, this might not be confusion. It might be design. Let's talk about your brain for a second. Psychologists have long studied something called openness to experience, one of the big 5 personality traits. People high in openness are curious, imaginative, drawn to novelty. They get bored doing the same thing for too long. They see connections between seemingly unrelated ideas. They feel alive when learning something new. Sound familiar? Research shows that high openness is strongly linked to creativity, innovation, and the ability to integrate ideas across fields. In other words, your brain isn't chaotic. It's integrative. It's constantly cross-wiring information from different domains, building mental bridges. You're not distracted. You're synthesizing. Think about it. When you study psychology and also learn marketing, suddenly you understand human behavior and how to communicate it. If you're into coding and design, you don't just build tools, you shape experiences. If you love fitness and storytelling, you don't just work out, you inspire transformation. The magic doesn't live in any one interest. It lives in the intersections. History quietly supports this. Some of the most impactful thinkers weren't one-lane specialists. They were multidimensional. They moved between science and art, technology and philosophy. Not because they were unfocused, but because their curiosity demanded more than one container. But here's where it gets psychologically tricky. When you have many interests, you're constantly confronted with trade-offs. Every time you choose one thing, you feel like you're betraying another. This can create something psychologists call decision paralysis. Too many possible identities. Too many possible futures. Your brain tries to simulate all of them at once, and ends up exhausted. So you hesitate. You start projects with passion and abandon them halfway. Not because you lack discipline, but because your attention is pulled by a new spark of possibility. Dopamine, the brain's motivation chemical, spikes when we encounter novelty. For people high in curiosity, that spike can be powerful. New ideas feel intoxicating. The problem isn't your curiosity. It's the lack of a structure that can hold it. In an old economy, you were told to suppress that curiosity. Pick one thing. Stick to it. Jack of all trades, master of none. That phrase probably haunted you at some point. But the full quote is actually, Jack of all trades, master of none, though oftentimes better than master of one. We just conveniently forgot the second half. In a rapidly changing world, driven by technology, automation, AI, and shifting industries, hyperspecialization can become fragile. When one skill becomes obsolete, the specialist feels stranded. But the person with multiple deep competencies? They adapt. They pivot. They recombine. That's the M-shaped advantage. Imagine you have depth in psychology and content creation, or finance and coding, or biology and storytelling. You're not just competing in one narrow field. You're creating your own hybrid space. You're harder to replace because your combination is rare. It's like genetics. A species with more variation survives environmental shifts better than one that's too uniform. Diversity is resilience. And psychologically, this matters. When your identity is tied to only one role, any threat to that role feels like an existential crisis. Lose the job, and you lose yourself. But when your identity is layered, multiple competencies, multiple passions, you have psychological buffers. If one pillar shakes, the others still stand. You are not one label. You are a portfolio. Now let's be honest about something. Having too many interests can also feel messy. You might struggle with consistency. You might compare yourself to people who are 10 years deep into one niche while you're exploring your third. You might feel behind. But behind according to what timeline? Linear careers create linear expectations. But exponential change demands nonlinear paths. There's a psychological concept called multipotentiality. It describes people who have the ability and preference to excel in multiple areas. For a long time, multipotentialites were misunderstood. Teachers saw them as unfocused. Employers saw them as risky. But in creative industries, startups, digital economies, they're often the glue. The translators. The bridge builders. Because when two specialists can't understand each other, you can. When the engineer talks in systems and the marketer talks in emotion, you speak both languages. That's not confusion. That's cognitive flexibility. And cognitive flexibility is one of the strongest predictors of adaptability and long-term success. But here's the key difference between scattered and M-shaped depth. Being interested in many things is the raw material. M-shaped growth requires you to go deep in at least 2 or 3 of them. Not forever. Not all at once. But sequentially, intentionally. Think of it like seasons. In one season of your life, you go deep into design. You practice. You struggle. You build real skill. That's one vertical line. Later, you immerse yourself in psychology. You read, you experiment, you apply. That's another pillar. Over time, those pillars don't compete. They collaborate. And something fascinating happens in the brain when you integrate different domains. Neuroscientists talk about remote associations, the ability to link distant concepts. Creative insight often emerges when two previously separate networks connect. The famous aha moment isn't random. It's cross-pollination. Your many interests are like separate cities in your mind. Depth builds strong infrastructure within each city. Integration builds highways between them. The M shape is not about doing everything at once. It's about building multiple strong cities and connecting them. Now, let's zoom in on the emotional side. Because if you're this kind of person, you've probably felt misunderstood. Maybe even by yourself. You've wondered, why can't I just be satisfied with one thing? But maybe satisfaction for you doesn't come from narrowing down. Maybe it comes from expanding out. There's a quiet grief that comes with choosing a single path when your heart is plural. And suppressing that plural nature can lead to chronic boredom, low-grade frustration, even burnout. Not because you're lazy, but because your brain is starving for novelty and integration. When you allow yourself to design a life that embraces multiple depths, something shifts. Instead of fighting your wiring, you cooperate with it. You stop asking, what's the one thing I should do forever? And start asking, what pillars do I want to build over time? That shift alone reduces anxiety. It replaces the pressure of permanence with the freedom of evolution. The future of work, especially in a digital world, increasingly rewards people who can combine skills in unique ways. Content creators who understand psychology. Entrepreneurs who understand data. Developers who understand storytelling. The rare value isn't in any single skill anymore. It's in the combination. And combinations are where you thrive. So if you've been beating yourself up for having too many interests, consider this: maybe you're not scattered. Maybe you're early. Early to a world that hasn't fully caught up to your wiring yet. But here's the responsibility part. Because potential without direction becomes chaos. You can't chase every spark forever. The M shape isn't about constant hopping. It's about deliberate depth. Choosing a pillar. Committing long enough to build real competence. Then, at the right time, adding another. It requires patience. It requires focus, just not permanent focus on one thing. Think of yourself not as a confused generalist, but as an architect. You're designing a structure that will take years. Each interest isn't a distraction. It's a potential pillar. But pillars take time to build. So the next time someone asks you what you do, and you hesitate, maybe smile a little. You're not a straight line. You're a structure under construction. And maybe that's the point. Because the future doesn't belong only to those who go deep in one narrow trench. It belongs to those who can build bridges across trenches. Those who can stand in multiple worlds and see patterns others miss. If you see yourself in this, don't shrink to fit a smaller box. Don't apologize for your curiosity. Instead, channel it. Choose your next pillar. Go deep. Stay long enough to gain mastery. Then connect it to the others. Your brain isn't broken. It's multidimensional. And in an M-shaped future, that might be exactly what the world needs. If this resonated with you, I'd love to know, what are your pillars? What interests keep calling you back? Drop them in the comments. Let's see how many bridge builders are here. And if you want to explore more psychology behind how your mind works, how to design a life around your wiring instead of against it, make sure you're subscribed. Because the future isn't just something that happens to you. It's something you build.